Hi everyone, Ford here from SonovaStitch, and welcome to another episode of SonovaStitchToob. This is probably my penultimate episode on cross-stitching basics, where we've been all making this pattern together. I share this studio with a sex ed show. We're all working on this together. I've given you the pattern, I've taught you how to read a cross-stitching pattern, I've shown you how to count the basic cross stitches as well as to do the fractional stitches. What we're going to do today is the backstitching. See these lines here that outline these letters, as well as the ones that give the blocks up here and all along the sides definition and pop to make them look just like less like blobs of stitches. That's called backstitching, and today I'm going to show you how to do that and some tips and tricks for making it look good and consistent. So let's go ahead and switch to the overhead view and get started. Take a look at our project, we can see a little more clearly here the stitches that we're going to be doing today. These straight lines that outline the letters are called backstitching, or straight stitching, or outline stitching. And that's what's going to connect all of these little isolated stitches that we've got in order to form the full picture of the stitch. So if we take a look at our pattern here, you can see that we've got these blue lines here indicating the outlines of the letters. If we look on the back at the key, we see that a blue line indicates DMC 321 red. And that's the same color that we used to fill in the mushroom, so we should already have it. We've got some other high contrast lines indicating other backstitch colors over here, but I'm just going to show you how to do the red, and then I'll let you do the rest of those on your own for the rest of this project. It's really nice to have the backstitch guide because it can be a little hard to see those. So I'm going to speed this up here while I pull off a piece of thread. Now, because we're not doing loop start, we're not doubling it back, we don't need as long a piece. I've only got about 18 inches here. So I'll get my needle threaded using my typical method that I've shown you in the previous episodes. I'm going to do this throughout the video where I speed things up if I've already shown you how to do it, so you don't have to just watch me make the damn thing in real time. Get our needle minder installed on there. Art/not art, one of my favorites, making a little joke about how fiber arts are not considered art because they're traditionally associated with women. We've got our thread about 1/3 of the way doubled back there. Just keeps it from slipping out of the needle. Now, because we're not doing loop start, we need to start this in a more traditional fashion. So I need to pick where I'm going to start. I can start anywhere along here. Personally, I kind of like to start at one place and work my way around. I'm going to start over here on the left side of the G. So I need to find that location on the back of the stitch, and I need to run my threaded needle underneath the backs of some of those stitches. Now, this is part of why it's important to keep your backs going in a consistent direction. It makes it easier to bury a needle and thread like this. So I'm going to pull that through all the way to the end. And then I'm going to go back in the opposite direction, but I'm going to miss one of the stitches I went under going the other direction. So I've basically got the thread wrapped around one stitch back there. That gives me a really high level of tension and friction to keep the thread in place. So then I can bring the needle back up to the front of my project and I can make my first stitch. Now, some people, when they do backstitching, they like to do the backstitch one square at a time. So they've got sort of a bunch of little dashes instead of consistent lines. I don't really like that look very much because it doesn't give quite as steady a line and it's harder to keep them straight. So I'm going to decide my maximum stitch length ahead of time so that I don't cheat. But my letters here are 5 stitches tall. Normally I only go about 4 stitches at a time, but I'm going to go ahead and max out at 5 on these so that I can have them be the same length as my letters. If you do them 1 stitch at a time, then every time that the thread has to go through the fabric, you get a little bit of a shadow and it sort of breaks the illusion of the line. And sometimes that's fine, but in this case, I want just a solid, consistent line to make the letters as readable as possible. So I'm going to make those stitches a little bit longer. So anywhere that I can go 3 or 4 stitches at a stretch with my needle, I'm going to do that. It also helps me save thread. So I'm going to start working my way around this G here. But when you're outlining something, you need to bear in mind that you're almost always going to end up right where you started. So choose your starting point carefully, and then think about the path that you're going to take so that you don't paint yourself into a corner or stitch yourself into a corner, as the case may be, and you leave yourself somewhere to go. Especially with letters like this where they're floating out in unstitched fabric, it's a lot harder to run your thread over somewhere. So I'm going to speed this up here while I stitch the rest of this G. I've got a little bit of a loop here, so this is an opportunity to show you how to fix these. These happen occasionally when the thread just kind of binds around itself. See how I've got that little knot looking thing there? And it's basically just a loop where it's looped around and wrapped around itself. The easiest way to deal with those is to put your needle in the loop and then pull it backwards. You'll see that the loop kind of has a directionality. Pull it in the opposite direction and it'll come undone. Now, I have to skip a little open fabric here to go from the top of the G to the bottom of the G, so I just want to make sure that I don't go through behind any holes and make the thread visible. Now I've also got a little bit of a problem here where the place that I need to bring my thread up is now going to have a stitch across the top of it, a stitch that I just did. So I'm actually going to leave myself a little bit of a loop there on that 2-length stitch across the top of the bottom part of the G. And I'm going to come up through it, making sure that my needle goes exactly where I want it to first, and then suck it down so that the thread lays flat across the top of that. If you come up through a hole behind thread, it'll sometimes snag it and it'll pull it and keep it from being straight. Now we've got a little spot here where I'm stitching along the diagonal on one of these 3/4 stitches, and those sometimes cross the middle line a little bit. So if you just do your stitch across the top of it, it'll sometimes kind of split that thread and you'll get a little bit of color overspill. So I recommend just leaving a little loop on top like this and then sticking your thumb on it to lay it flat against the fabric and then pull it tight. That will suck your back stitch up right up against the fabric instead of smashing and splitting your 3/4 stitch, so that your line looks more crisp and solid. So let's finish up the G here. Now when you're jumping over to the R, make sure that you don't go vertical or horizontal or a 45-degree angle so that you don't get your thread visible when you're done. Just go around this R the rest of the way. And now I've got a spot here where I need to come up through a hole that is behind a place where I already ran a thread. So I need to find that location on the back. It's really handy to flip the project over for this. And I need to bring the needle through very close to parallel with the surface of the fabric so that I can make sure that I don't punch through that long vertical line that I already stitched. That way when I pull it, it's not going to pull that line out of straight. Again, it's just another way to help keep your lines nice and crisp. So now we'll move on over to the O. And again, it's real easy with a letter when you're stitching around it to stitch yourself into a corner. So just pay attention to your thread paths. And now we have a little bit of a decision to make here as well, because if I go across the W the way I just went across the O, I'm going to wind up a long way from where I want to go. I'm going to wind up over in the corner. And I don't want to wind up there because the next place I want to go is down here to this exclamation point. So I need to think about my path carefully, and what I'm going to do probably is I'm going to stitch over to the side of the W and then come back into the close side of the W afterwards, so that my finishing point is in a good spot to let me get over to the exclamation point. When you're doing this, if you know you need to come back, it's a good idea to leave yourself a little bit of space, like to miss a stitch, so that you can then do that stitch on the way back past. Like if you look closely here, you'll notice that I didn't do the one little tiny vertical stitch in the middle of the W until I was on my way back, just so I had a stopping point that I could reach when I was on my way back to the other half of the W. So now I need to move across a little more space than I've moved across before. I need to move across these 3 empty stitches to get down here to the exclamation point. And the place that I ended up is directly above the right-hand side of the exclamation point. So if I bring it straight down, you're going to be able to see my red thread behind the fabric. Let's bring it closer so you can see that. So you can see there that there's a little bit of red thread visible through those holes, straight down from the W to the exclamation point. And we don't want that, especially once we finish this project. So I'm going to choose a different path for that. And I'm going to go over to the left side of the exclamation point first. Then I've got a line with a slope of 3 instead of a slope of infinity. And I won't have a visible thread there. So now we're going to work our way around. Use that little trick again where I get the floss to lay flat against the side when I'm doing those fractional stitches. You can watch me do it here as I go through super fast. Probably see me making some weird choices about the order, and I'm basically just conserving stitches and conserving thread. There, now we're done with all of our back stitching. Now this is a point before you bury that thread and tie it off. It's a good opportunity to take a close look at what you've just done and double check everything. Make sure that you haven't missed any short little stems, like the one in the middle of that G is real easy to miss. I have a tendency to forget to do the tops of ascenders, like the tops of vertical lines on letters, or to miss one of the little diagonal pieces against one of the fractional stitches. So it's a good idea at this point to just take a close look at that and make sure that you haven't forgotten anything and that you haven't messed up your pattern. It's a lot harder to do that, and it makes your back a lot messier if you have to start a whole new thread to pick up one stitch. Looks like I've got everything, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off my thread. Finish it off just like we've done before, and just like we started it by burying it under some stitches. Now if you look, you'll notice that there are not a lot of stitches here for me to bury it under. So I'm going to go under one of these and go up a row to where I have a couple more stitches that I can use for burying my end here. Sometimes if you're in a really sparse area, you do need to get a little bit creative, like going back and forth under the same stitch a couple of times, or I will even occasionally stick my needle through the weave of the fabric in order to give me some friction to hold it. Now, if you do that before you pull it tight and tie it off, you want to turn it over and look at the front. Make sure that that's not visible from the front. But with Ada, you can very frequently just stick it through the weave a little bit and get yourself a little bit of thread tension to hold it tight. So then we'll go ahead and just trim that thread. And look at our handiwork. All right, text is all done. So what remains now is to do the backstitching that the pattern calls for around all of these little blocks around the frame. Now you've got some black that's called for up here on these orange blocks. That's indicated by these red lines. Because we're going to also use the black for the French knot, don't do that yet. You can do any of the other backstitching that's on here, but on the next episode I'm going to show you how to do that French knot with my foolproof method. And it's easier if we just use the same thread for that backstitching and then for the French knot that we're going to do. So go ahead and do the orange that's there and do the sand color and the dark brown that are on these other blocks, using the same method that I've shown you here, and in the next episode we'll do the last bit of it. Thanks so much for joining me. That's it for this episode. Next time I'm going to show you how to do a French knot, which is this little dot of a stitch right here. That is a stitch that vexes a lot of cross stitchers, but I have a foolproof method that I think is going to really help you out. Thank you so much to my patrons for helping me make this possible. Find my Patreon at patreon.com/SonovaStitch. In particular, I would like to thank my VIP patrons, Robin, Chris, Brittany, Shakira, Heather, Katrina, Andrea, Robin, Lacey, Elizabeth, Heather, and Terry. You can find my store at SonovaStitch.etsy.com. Find me on Facebook at SonovaStitchXS or on Instagram at SonovaStitch. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.